You're watching the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. Coming up, with nearly half of France's reactors offline, should the UK be relying on nuclear power for our future energy? Germany's climate envoy tells us the growing energy crisis in Europe is of huge concern for crucial emissions targets.
There is additional pressure that's coming in right now. And I'm worried, of course I'm worried. I see the rise of emissions. We're going in the wrong direction.
And we'll be hearing from model and environmentalist Lily Cole on why she believes universities hold the key to tackling the climate crisis. Hello and welcome to the UK's only daily climate news programme where we track the changes happening to our world, hear from the people being hit hardest by those changes and report on the race for solutions. First now, half of France's nuclear power reactors are offline today in the latest squeeze on European power supplies. France is traditionally one of Europe's biggest electricity exporters and has the lowest per capita emissions of all advanced economies due to nuclear power being a low-carbon option. But the dip in output poses difficult questions for countries such as the UK, who are looking to expand nuclear power as part of their future energy plans. This time last year, nuclear energy was generating 70% of France's electricity, but France's national grid, RTE, earlier today had the figure at around 57%. That's because 28 of France's 56 reactors have been shut down due to routine maintenance or defects. Well, 5 reactors marked here in black were shut down after corrosion caused cracking in the pipework. The remaining 23 plants are down either for routine yearly maintenance or for safety reviews. It means that France will need to draw upon power from the European grid, which is already strained from the energy crisis. Well, our climate reporter Victoria Seabrook is with me to explain more. So really, Victoria, the idea that nuclear is always on is actually wrong.
Well, that's what critics are saying. They're saying, hang on a minute, what happened to this big selling point of nuclear is that it's reliable. That's what we hear. It's always on. And the other big selling point, of course, being that it is virtually zero carbon. And so France is potentially finding itself in this bizarre situation at the moment where nuclear output is down. And so they are probably drawing on renewables a bit to compensate for that. And that's ironic because the supporters of nuclear often say, well, we need it to supplement renewables for when the sun isn't shining and the wind isn't blowing. Now, this all matters to the UK because the government has just put nuclear at the heart of its energy security strategy. So this strategy is about the future of our energy. Part of it is all about getting off gas, and that's what this strategy is designed to do. And I spoke to the Energy Department this week and they told me that, look, nuclear, it's not a luxury, this is a necessity. They say it is the only reliable, low-carbon form of power. So they are planning to build 8 nuclear reactors with the idea that they will generate 25% of Britain's power by 2050.
Now, Germany has found itself at the centre of a European energy crisis. Dependent on Russian fossil fuels for heavy industry, are ambitious climate targets going to be out of reach? Our climate change correspondent Hannah Thomas-Peter has been speaking to Germany's climate envoy, Jennifer Morgan.
Vladimir Putin has stopped gas supplies to Poland and to Bulgaria, and it has been labelled as blackmail and a weaponisation of energy supplies. With your climate envoy hat on, what is your response to that?
Well, I think it's very clear we've been working hard to phase out Russian fossil fuels as quickly as possible as part of a greater effort to phase out fossil fuels because of the climate crisis. And I think that we will continue on that pathway. There are many reasons to do that.
When you look globally, in relation to tackling the climate crisis, how concerned are you that the war in Ukraine will prevent nations moving forward quickly with their plans to tackle global warming?
Well, I think the first thing is, which is evident just about every day, is that the climate crisis hasn't gone away, even in the midst of this horrific other set of the war and other crises. And I think that in my travels around the world, you still see that. You still see that governments understand that and are trying to move forward. However, you know, we need to work hard to keep the momentum, because I think that there are players around the world that will try and use this moment to build new fossil fuel infrastructure and lock it in. And we know from the International Energy Agency and the IPCC that there's no time actually for new fossil fuel infrastructure. So we have to remain diligent. We have to work in partnership, particularly with the most vulnerable countries around the world. And we're using our G7 presidency in every way we can to not lose momentum, because there is additional pressure that's coming in right now. And I'm worried, of course I'm worried. I see the rise of emissions. We're going in the wrong direction. And this has to be a moment where we come together and accelerate the pace, not only to have peace, but also to have climate stability.
Germany is building new fossil fuel infrastructure, new plants to deal with liquid natural gas. Are you concerned that in your own country there is going to be an issue with locking in fossil fuel infrastructure?
Well, certainly this is, as I said, it's a short-term solution, and it's also what we're looking at is using this moment, which I think you're seeing around the world, the issue of green hydrogen and infrastructure for green hydrogen, and that anything that we're doing right now has to be ready for green hydrogen. So we're trying to double track in a way and accelerate the pace to green hydrogen. And also to make clear, these aren't, these aren't super long-term contracts. We have the climate crisis in mind. Is it easy? No. Is it necessary? Absolutely.
Let's get some of the day's other climate news now. The wildlife trusts have asked visitors to refrain from barbecues and to be careful to extinguish any sources of fires, such as cigarettes, this bank holiday. That's because a series of wildfires have killed wild animals and destroyed large swathes of key nature reserves. April has been notably dry, with only around half the normal amount of rainfall in England and Wales, meaning grasslands are especially prone to catching fire. People across India are bracing themselves as the extreme temperatures of the last several weeks are set to intensify. Heat warnings are in place across nearly all of the country's 28 states, with temperatures forecast to reach 46 degrees in the capital Delhi over the coming days, with concerns rising about how the country's population will cope with the heat. Extreme temperatures are also causing major damage to crops, which are the primary source of income for hundreds of millions of Indians. New data from an energy think tank has revealed a record amount of electricity was generated by renewable power sources in the US last month. Research from think tank Ember revealed that wind and solar farms generated 18% of US electricity in March. That's enough to supply a country the size of Portugal with electricity for a whole year. Now, we've talked a lot on this show about climate in education, and the government recently announced the introduction of a new natural history GCSE, which will be available from 2025. However, there's a lack of awareness among the public over how much work is being done on climate issues at university level. Earlier, I spoke to the model and environmentalist Lily Cole about a new campaign being launched this week to highlight the role of universities in tackling the challenge.
Universities UK have published a report that just came out that I wrote the forward to, which looks at climate action that's being driven by universities across the UK, to both celebrate the work that's being done by students, professors, universities, and also, I think, in a way to galvanise more action, because universities are in a really kind of unique position to play kind of an important role in the climate crisis and addressing the climate crisis, both because of universities' responsibility and access to educating the youth, the next generation, but also with kind of unprecedented, unparalleled research facilities. And we're already seeing examples of that being deployed, and universities kind of helping come up with climate solutions. And hopefully we will see more of that.
What do you think your climate education was like? When did you start to feel passionate about climate issues? Do you feel like you learned anything about it in university?
It's a good question. I mean, I went to Cambridge University, and I write in the report about some of the things Cambridge are doing, because I think they've really kind of been doing a lot from what I've seen. Cambridge Zero was a group set up by Emily Shukba, who I'd interviewed for my book, Who Cares Wins, so I know a little bit. And they're trying to use the different research kind of multidisciplinary approaches that the university has to try and innovate around climate solutions. That was founded, I'm just using that as an example, but that was founded after I was studying at Cambridge, which is not to say that there wasn't a kind of environmental awareness, but it definitely wasn't as dominant as it is today. And I think that's reflective of just wider society, and the fact that when I started looking into kind of environmental issues as a teenager, which is, dare I say, nearly 20 years ago, there just was much less mainstream awareness of the issues that we're facing.
When you were younger and quite early on in your career, you made the move to say that you didn't want to wear fur. That's quite bold, and I think lots of people said to you, aren't you worried about your career prospects and perhaps not getting any jobs and because of your decision? What would you say to anybody who perhaps wants to make more of a stance on climate but fears that it may detrimentally impact their career, it may really impact their job and they're not being supported by their boss? What would you say to them?
That it is the future, that there is no fighting science and physics, and that we cannot kind of procrastinate and talk our way out of the reality of the science. And so all industries have to go this way. I mean, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, say it's now or never to take action on the climate crisis, and are calling for transformative change across all industries. So the stakes have never been higher, the actions and the kind of need for action has never been clearer. And so anybody who actually has a good business sense sees that the future lies in an alternative pathway.
And one more bit of news for you. More than half of Britain's polled say they support the demands being made by protest group Just Stop Oil. The number of people saying they were likely to engage in some form of climate action over the next year also increased by almost 3% during the protests. Just Stop Oil has been using disruptive protests to demand the UK government stops new fossil fuel projects. Do stay with us. Coming up, I'll be joined by Alyssa Gilbert from the Grantham Institute and James Streeter, Executive Chairman of the Interclimate Network. We'll be discussing the disruptive protests and whether it's really effective. Also, how good education might be key to solving the climate crisis.
I mean, everybody gets abuse online to some degree, and that's not acceptable. But the abuse that women get is often of a sexualized and gendered nature. For instance, I'm often sent pictures of empty egg cartons because I'm a woman in my 30s making my voice heard in a predominantly male industry. And some men think that I should stick to making babies. And often for women, online abuse becomes offline abuse very quickly. We are doxxed. Our personal information is shared online. Often here in the US, we see swatting, where a SWAT team is called to someone's house under a fake bomb threat. Women are stalked. And I've had friends who are active in this space who have had the FBI show up to their house because there are legitimate death threats against them. So yes, you could learn a lot from this book in terms of, IT security and physical security, but it really is focused on the specific threats that women face and how to make sure that we have an equitable space online, because those who are abusing us, who are harassing us, wish to silence us, frankly. And that shouldn't be acceptable in 2022, just as it wouldn't be acceptable if these insults, these slurs were being shouted at us on the street or in the workplace. Well, the first thing I think is just very basic IT security, making sure you're using different passwords for all your accounts. You can use a password manager to do this, making sure you've got two-factor authentication turned on so that if somebody did get a hold of your password, they'd need another factor to get into that account. That protects your personal information. And then there's a little bit more tactical, tips on how to deal with trolls online, all the different sorts of people that show up in our Twitter mentions or Facebook comments. comments, making sure you're using the affordances that platforms do have. So using the mute, block, and report buttons, because those send important signals to the platforms to tell them what's going on, and that perhaps this person who's been sending abusive messages all day long needs to endure some sort of consequence with his or her account. And then finally, it talks about building a community, not just within your peers and colleagues, but looking for support among employers. It's not just newsrooms that should be looking out for their employees in this day and age. We have healthcare workers, we have academics, we have lots and lots of people who use the internet as part of their jobs, and employers need to do a little bit more to make sure they're supporting those folks.
Hello and welcome back to the Daily Climate Show on Sky News. Let's discuss some more of these crucial climate issues with our guests today, Alyssa Gilbert, Director of Policy and Translation at the Grantham Institute, and James Streeter from the Interclimate Network. So, climate change, huge issue, affects every area of our lives. Some people even suffering with climate anxiety. One way to ease said climate anxiety is to empower people. James, let's start with you. That's something that your organisation is working to do.
Yes, thanks, Chloe. Let me just explain very briefly. Interclimate Network is a UK charity where we engage young people at secondary school level and run events throughout the year. Last year, we actually carried out one of the largest surveys of young people on climate change and sustainability. And you're absolutely right. One of the things we found was the challenge with the anxiety. But and this does come from, as you said, this sort of powerlessness. So it's really important that action is something which is promoted as part of education. So I think the sustainability and climate change strategy for education is a good start, and the natural history GCSE will formalise that part of the education system, as opposed to what it's been in the past, which has been down to a few selected individuals.
Alyssa, this is really complicated stuff. There's no simple solutions to climate change. When do you think we should start educating youngsters about climate issue? When's the right time?
Well, I think we should work in the same way that we do in educating people about any kind of issue. We start teaching people the basic principles of asking questions around science, for example, at a very young age, to learn the skills and the ways of thinking that they require so that they can become talented and sophisticated scientists at a university and postgraduate level eventually, or stop somewhere in between and apply those skills. The same is true for climate change, actually. Working on climate change issues actually involves possibly different ways of thinking. We need people to be able to think across different sectors, flexibly solve problems. Those kind of skills we should be building into education from an early age. And additionally, it's important that people appreciate and feel nature, and they understand the environment around them. So the kind of immersive learning, student-led approaches, all of these things can be incorporated in the curriculum from very early on. And I think it was just last week or so, the government published a sustainability and climate change education strategy, or white paper, that came out of the Department for Education. And that encompasses aspects of learning about climate change right from early years all the way up to university, postgraduate, and adult skills.
James, let's bring you in. What sort of response have you had from students that you've been working with the work that you've been doing?
Yeah, the response has been amazing. So firstly, could I just sort of add to Alyssa's answer? I think the really key point in education is the secondary level, because climate change is a complicated subject, and you need the students to be at a level where they can understand and really react and work with that complexity. And also at secondary level, you are made by your teacher and brought along by the school to do things that you would not necessarily do yourself. When you get to university, it becomes rather self-selecting. So I think the secondary education part is absolutely crucial. Now, the GCSE, I think, is great. It's a good start, but it's really important that it cuts across a whole range of subjects. Climate change, as we're seeing, is not just about anymore the biology and the geography. It's about economics, it's about politics, it's about engineering, design, things like this. And also the importance of bringing in the action. What we found through our survey into Climate Network is that young people, their awareness is increased. As Lily Cole mentioned in her interview, the awareness when she started was virtually nothing. But what they want to know is what to do around climate change. For example, what to buy that actually is not degrading the environment. Secondly, they want to know, they want leadership. They want the adults in the room, particularly the teachers, to walk the talk and show them what to do. And then I think that thirdly here, there's it's about the buildings and making them actually fit for the future. I think if you put all the schools in the country together, you get an area roughly 2 times the size of Birmingham. So there's a huge potential there for mitigation, but also there are opportunities. I mean, think of the biodiversity opportunities, for example, if you manage to do something across that whole area.
Alicia, just quickly on this, it's not just the youngsters. We've been talking a lot about youngsters and students, is it? It's the whole workforce, really. We need to upskill so they can also work in climate issues. How do we go about doing that?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. It's really important that we make sure that we have the skills available and necessary to actually deliver the net zero and resilient future that we see ahead of ourselves. One of the ways that we can do that is by making sure that our approach to education across all ages, including adult education, is tightly linked to our development of the green skills agenda. And actually, the government has been long promising a green jobs delivery group, which will build on work both on climate education and on the Green Jobs Task Force so that we can pull together education with skills as soon as possible.
OK, and now let's change subject. Earlier, we were talking about that poll that found more than half of Britons say they support the demands being made by the group Just Stop Oil, but perhaps not their methods. James, let's start with you on protest. There's a fine line, isn't there, between a protest to make a point and then criminal activity?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, first of all, people should, we've got to make it clear, people should be allowed to protest. And it is a really good way of democratizing climate change. But you're spot on, it has to be peaceful and legal. Unfortunately, what we're finding is it's increasingly being driven by desperation. People around see that the leadership are not making the decisions and taking the country in the direction they want. So I think it's really important that that people see that protesting comes in different forms. It's not just about the physical obstruction that we've seen. There's also about schools marching for climate and also more sophisticated protests, such as a legal challenge.
Alyssa, let's get your opinion on this. Recently, we saw new laws for police giving them more powers to take action at protests. Do you think that was needed?
Well, in terms of, I just sort of reiterate what James has said. I think protest and speaking out about climate change in particular has been actually a very important way for the public to actually indicate that the government was behind on their action. This is an area where, if you look towards the school strikes and Fridays for the Future movement of a few years ago, that really woke up politicians to see that such a large part of the population really wanted to see faster action on this issue. I don't think that meant that we need police activity. I think that means that we need government response to these issues.
Alyssa and James, thank you so much for joining us. Really interesting debate there. Now, if you scan the QR code on your screen right now, you can listen to the latest edition of Sky News' Climate Cast. In today's edition, Samantha Washington speaks to our climate correspondent Hannah Thomas-Peter about whether the war in Ukraine will mean Europe will be forced to abandon climate ambitions and burn more coal, the dirtiest of polluters. You can subscribe now wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks so much for watching. See you next time.